getting rid of my thoughts? B. And why do you wish to get rid of them? A. Why should I wish? Do I really wish? I must. B. Enough, enough. 94. Growth after death. Those few daring words about moral matters which Fontenelle threw into his immortal Dialogues of the Dead were so regarded by his age as paradoxes and amusements of a not unscrupulous wit. Even the highest judges of taste and intellect saw nothing more in them. Indeed, Fontenelle himself perhaps saw nothing more. Then something incredible takes place. These thoughts become truths. Science proves them. The game becomes serious. And we read those dialogues with a feeling different from that which Voltaire and Helvetius read them. And we voluntarily raise their originator into another and much higher class of intellects than they did. Rightly? Wrongly? 95. Chamfort. That such a judge of men and of the multitude as Chamfort should side with the multitude, instead of standing apart in philosophical resignation and defence, I am at a loss to explain, except as follows. There was an instinct in him stronger than his wisdom, and it never had been gratified, the hatred against all noblesse of blood. Perhaps his mother's old and only too explicable hatred, which was consecrated in him by love of her, and instinct of revenge from his boyhood, which waited for the hour to avenge his mother. But then the course of his life, his genius, and alas, most of all, perhaps, the paternal blood in his veins, had seduced him to rank and consider himself equal to the noblesse for many, many years. In the end, however, he could not endure the sight of himself, the "old man" under the old regime any longer. He got into a violent penitential passion, and, in this state, he put on the raiment of the populace in his special kind of hair shirt. His bad conscience was the neglect of revenge. If Chamfort had then been a little more of the philosopher, the revolution would not have had its tragic wit and its sharpest sting. It would have been regarded as a much more stupid affair, and would have had no such seductive influence on men's minds. But Chamfort's hatred and revenge educated an entire generation, and the most illustrious men passed through his school. Let us consider that Mirabeau looked up to Chamfort as his higher and older self, from whom he expected and endured impulses, warnings, and condemnations. Mirabeau, who as a man belongs to an entirely different order of greatness, as the foremost among statesmen geniuses of yesterday and today. Strange that in spite of such a friend and advocate, we possess Mirabeau's letters to Chamfort. This wittiest of all moralists had remained unfamiliar to the French, quite the same as Stendhal, who has perhaps had the most penetrating eyes and ears of any Frenchman of this century. Is it because the latter had really too much of the German and English in his nature for the Parisians to endure him? While Chamfort, a man of ample knowledge of the profundities and secret motives of the soul, gloomy, suffering, ardent, a thinker who found laughter necessary as a remedy of life, and who almost gave himself up as lost every day that he had not laughed, seems much more like an Italian, and related by blood to Dante and Leopardi, than like a Frenchman. One knows Chamfort's last words. Ah, mon ami, he said to Sées, je m'en vais enfin de ce monde, où les femmes qui le cuir se brisent ou se bronzent. These were certainly not the words of a dying Frenchman. 96. Two orators. Of these two orators the one arrives at a full understanding of his case only when he yields himself to emotion. It is only this that pumps sufficient blood and heat into his brain to compel his high intellectuality to reveal itself. The other attempts, indeed, now and then to do the same, to state his case sonorously, vehemently, and spiritedly with the aid of emotion, but usually with bad success. He then very soon speaks obscurely and confusedly, he exaggerates, makes omissions, and excites suspicion of the justice of his case. Indeed, he himself feels this suspicion, and the sudden changes into the coldest and most repulsive tones, which raise a doubt in the hearer as to his passionateness being genuine, are thereby explicable. With him, emotion always drowns the spirit, perhaps because it is stronger than the former. But he is at the height of his power when he resists the impetuous storm of his feeling, and, as it were, scorns it. It is then only that his spirit emerges fully from its concealment, a spirit logical, mocking, and playful, but nevertheless awe-inspiring. 97. The loquacity of authors. There is a loquacity of anger, frequent in Luther, also in Schopenhauer, a loquacity which comes from too great a store of conceptual formulae, as in Kant, a loquacity which comes from delight in ever new modifications of the same idea. One finds it in Montaigne. A loquacity of malicious natures. Whoever reads writings of our period will recollect two authors in this connection. A loquacity which comes from the delight in fine words and forms of speech, by no means rare in Goethe's prose. A loquacity which comes from pure satisfaction in noise and confusion of feelings, for example, in Carlyle. 98. In honour of Shakespeare. The best thing I could say in honour of Shakespeare, the man, is that he believed in Brutus, and cast not a shadow of suspicion on the kind of virtue which Brutus represents. It is to him that Shakespeare consecrated his best tragedy. It is at present still called by a wrong name. To him, and to the most terrible essence of lofty morality, independence of soul, that is the question at issue. No sacrifice can be too great there. One must be able to sacrifice to it even one's dearest friend, although he be also the grandest of men, the ornament of the world, the genius without peer. If one really loves freedom as the freedom of great souls, and if this freedom be threatened by him, it is thus that Shakespeare must have felt. The elevation in which he places Caesar is the most exquisite honour he could confer upon Brutus. It is thus only that he lifts into vastness the inner problem of his hero, and similarly the strength of soul which could cut this knot. And was it actually political freedom that impelled the poet to sympathy with Brutus, and made him the accomplice of Brutus? Or was political freedom merely a symbol for something inexpressible? Do we perhaps stand before some sombre event or adventure of the poet's own soul, which has remained unknown, and of which he only cared to speak symbolically? What is all Hamlet melancholy in comparison with the melancholy of Brutus? And perhaps Shakespeare also knew this, as he knew the other by experience. Perhaps he also had his dark hour and his bad angel, just as Brutus had them. But whatever similarities and secret relationships of that